Welcome to the only daily podcast focusing on compliance news of the day. Each morning, start your day with a cup of coffee and Tom Fox, the voice of compliance, to hear about 4 of the top compliance, corruption, or leadership stories you will need to start your day. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network.
September 16, 2020, the Bad Actors Edition. We began with an article from the Washington Post that a House committee has subpoenaed the National Relations Labor Board over potential conflict of interest among board members. The legal request comes more than a year after attempts by committee to require ethics-related documentation from the NLRB. Obviously, under the Trump administration, it has become a cesspool of anti-union and pro-company rulings, but now it's clear that, or at least the House suspects that the board members personally benefited from their political terminations. Next up, in just a terrible, terrible story from the New York Times, 2 ex-owners of a former nursing home chain at the heart of the biggest default in the history of federal mortgage guarantee program have been indicted on charges they bilked millions from investors in a Ponzi scheme. Zy Feiner and Ezra Baver, who raised money for what were Rosewood Care Centers, chain of nursing homes, mainly in Chicago suburbs, and money raised from the Orthodox Jewish communities in Chicago and New York. However, turns out that they were simply using the monies to benefit themselves and had leveraged up to the hilt, and of course then defaulted on the loans. So just a terrible story of yet another man of faith bilking people who trusted him. The Justice Department has entered the probe of the electric truck startup Nikola over claims it misled investigators. The U.S. Attorney's Office in New York has joined SEC regulators in examining allegations related to the company's public statements. Specifically, prosecutors are probing allegations that Nikola, a maker of electric and hydrogen-powered semi-trucks that publicly listed in June, misrepresented progress it had made in developing key technology core to releasing its models. So, more bad news for Nikola. This, of course, comes from after the Hindenburg report accused Nikola, an executive chair, of making false statements and basically telling investors to short the company because it's in for a big fall. And finally, and just a bizarre story from the Wall Street Journal, GM accuses a former board member of leaking confidential information to Fiat Chrysler and the United Auto Workers, but to take it a step further, claims that Fiat Chrysler bribed the former board member. In a federal lawsuit this week, the company accused Joseph Ashton of taking money and leaking information to both of those entities, which was to the direct detriment of General Motors. He is a former UAW member who sat on the GM board as a part of an overall long-term settlement where UAW has a seat on the GM board. And these allegations are incredibly troubling, particularly if cash was paid to him by Fiat Chrysler, and of course him passing on confidential information to UAW beyond what his ability to do so had been. The Daily Compliance News is a production of the Compliance Podcast Network and a proud member of C-Suite Radio. Thanks so much for listening. I hope you'll join me again tomorrow.